Mitt and Minn, Part 7. When we left Part 6, Minn was here. She was at the famous Chicago Navy Pier, but it wasn't a good situation for her. We start chapter 20 with Mitt's location, and it is the museum. Chapter 20, the museum. By now, Mitt was deep inside the Field Museum of Natural History, hiding in a scene set for woodland creatures such as himself. There were 2 striped chipmunks and a possum, 3 cottontail rabbits, and 1 white-tailed deer. Of course, they were not alive, but they were made to look as if they were. Convinced this would be a safe place to hide, Mitt found a false log that looked very real and crawled inside to wait until dark. He had nowhere to go, no way to find his parents. What he needed now was sleep and time to think. But that wasn't going to happen. A group of school children had just entered the museum, and their teacher was opening the door to the exhibit where Mitt was hiding. They were beginning to poke around and gently touch some of the items inside, and before Mitt knew it, one little boy found Mitt. Believing the mouse was part of the exhibit, he began patting Mitt on the head. Mitt stood still. The little boy patted Mitt again, only this time a little bit harder. Mitt stood even more still. He did not blink. The little boy began to poke and needle Mitt a bit harder than he should have been doing. The teacher kept telling the young boy not to touch the mouse, but the little boy did not listen. The next moment, the little boy lifted his fist high into the air, intending to come right down on Mitt's head. By now, Mitt had enough. The teacher's back was now turned, so Mitt had only one choice. He jumped up and landed on top of the little boy's head. Mitt then hopped down and raced out the open door and down the street as fast as he could. Let me show you the illustration because it's just adorable. So that's the illustration of that scene that Mrs. B just read. Back to the book. Meanwhile, at the pier, the red-winged blackbirds were in fast pursuit of Marnie and Minn. The gull was quickly confused by the sights and sounds of the cars and people and began to fly inward toward the city. She dashed between rows of apartment buildings and stores and flew over telephone wires and through alleys and parking lots. All the while, the blackbirds were right behind her. But when the red-winged blackbirds felt they were too far from their territory and had chased the gull far enough, they turned around and headed back to the pier. However, Minn didn't have a moment to let out of a sigh of relief, because now Marnie the gull was landing on a strip of lawn outside a row of large, old-fashioned houses with long porches. The gull placed 1 foot on Minn's belly. It was all over. Chapter 22. It's titled Acorns. Mitt, who was still rushing as far away from the museum as possible, didn't notice how he had run all the way through the downtown and into a pretty street of well-kept houses. Each one was large and brightly painted. Mitt stopped to catch his breath. Then he heard a squeal. Mitt knew it in an instant, in the way that mice know the familiar sounds of other mice, that the squeal belonged to Minn. When he saw the gull lowering its head and opening its bill, Mitt did the only thing he could think of doing. The boulevard was lined with trees of all sorts, linden trees and white mulberry, silver maple, and serviceberry trees. But Mitt saw a giant white oak tree not far from the gull, and beneath it were fallen acorns. Mitt stood behind the tree and 1, 2, 3, he began to toss acorns at the gull's head. Plop, plop, plop. The moment the gull looked up, wham! Mitt tossed a huge acorn right between its eyes. The commotion had disturbed a kestrel from its roost, and as the kestrel dived down, the gull flew away. Mitt raced to Minn's side, almost in disbelief that it was truly her lying on the grass. Minn, too, thought perhaps she was dreaming when she saw Mitt. But there was no time to talk about what had happened, as the pair had no choice but to scramble for safety, for the kestrel coming down for both of them. The pair spotted a middle-aged man on the porch with a broom, the door to his home wide open. They ran in without notice. The man did see the kestrel, and he raised his broom to it. Inside, Mitt and Minn did a silent cheer. As much as they were cheering that the kestrel, the gull, and the blackbirds were gone, they were cheering to be together again. The house was very large. There were 4 beautiful velvet couches in the parlor and copper lamps on every table. There was a fireplace with a carved mantel, old clocks, and pictures and frames everywhere. Mitt and Minn didn't want to waste too much time talking about why they were separated and where they had been. Time was running out. The last leaf of autumn had fallen, and if they were to find their parents, they had better do it soon. Before Mitt and Minn had a chance to find a quiet corner for their home, the middle-aged man walked into the room and shut the door. He spotted the mice, and he was holding a broom. Here's a cute illustration of them when they were out on the front porch of the man's house, and they were looking for a way to get in. I just love the illustrations of Mitt and Minn. They're so adorably cute. Chapter 22. It's titled Richard, and there's another very cute illustration of Mitt and Minn. Well, hello there, you little darlings, he said. Mitt and Minn both understood the man, much in the way that mice can understand smiling men, and so they didn't back away when he came closer. The pair was sitting on a library table next to an old dusty dictionary. Mitt began to sneeze. The man laughed. He held out his hand and said, "I will find a better place for you than this." With that, the man took Mitt and Minn to an old dollhouse set up on a table in the middle of the sunroom. The sunroom was painted bright yellow, and there were blue and white curtains on all 9 windows. The dollhouse was very large and had many rooms with soft beds, just the right size for Mitt and Minn. The man placed Mitt upon the tiny red couch in the dollhouse living room, while he put Minn upon a bed in the master bedroom. Once he had settled them there, the man gave another laugh and said, "I always hoped this antique would come in handy for something. Feels really nice to put it to use." Mitt and Minn felt at ease in his home and let him know, in the best way that they could, that they knew he was kind and that they were not afraid of him. "I'm Richard," the man said. "I own this bed and breakfast. You may stay here as long as you like." 4th graders, a bed and breakfast is a type of kind of hotel, but it's not really a hotel. It's a house that is usually an older home, and you can rent a room, kind of like you'd rent a hotel room, to stay there. And then obviously it's called a bed and breakfast because in the morning when you're ready to leave, they'll serve you breakfast before you would leave for checking out. So that's why it's called a bed and breakfast. So that's where they're at right now. Okay, back to the book. With that, Richard walked away, only to return moments later with a small plate of dried cherries, bits of Swiss cheese, and one large slice of oatmeal bread. Minn was so excited to eat that she knocked over a stack of thread spools displayed on the table outside the dollhouse. "Truth is," he said, "I don't get much in the way of business here any more, and I could really use the company. The only company I seem to have is that ghost. She just won't leave." Mitt and Minn swallowed very slowly. For a brief while it seemed that they were living in the best place 2 road-weary mice could live, but a ghost? Richard must have seen the worry on their faces. Oh, but it's a nice ghost. I know that much. When there are crumbs on the table, the crumbs vanish overnight. If I lose something, it's right where it should be the next day. This is a very helpful ghost, and a nice one at that. And then his face turned sad. It's just that ever since people started talking about my bed and breakfast having a ghost, I don't get as many visitors. Truth is, I'm getting sort of lonesome. Mitt and Minn felt sorry as they listened to Richard's story. It must be sad to have such a lovely business as his and not have customers, all because of a ghost that won't leave. But even so, Mitt and Minn weren't exactly sure they wanted to meet this ghost. When Richard said good night and turned out the lights, Mitt and Minn fell into a very deep sleep. In the morning, the first thing Mitt noticed was that the plate Richard had used to serve them bread and cheese was completely clean. The spools of thread Minn had knocked over earlier were neatly stacked, just as they had been the day before. "Mitt," asked Minn, "did you do that?" "No," whispered Mitt. "Didn't you?" Right then Richard appeared with a cup of morning coffee for himself and a saucer of cream for Mitt and Minn. "See," he said, "I told you so." It was true. The house was haunted. Okay, so is this house really haunted? Let's take one more chapter to find out. This chapter is actually titled Gertie. And there's a picture of the bread and the cheese and what they would have eaten. Later that day, Mitt and Minn told Richard their story. They told him how they had come very far to find their parents and how it seemed as if they never would. Richard understood the mice. "It is almost winter now and far too dangerous for you to be trying to find your parents. You must stay where it is warm and safe. They are probably doing the same thing." Then Richard had an idea. "Stay with me through the winter, and I will help you find your parents in the spring." It seemed like a good idea to Mitt and Minn, who enjoyed Richard's company very much. He kept them warm and well fed and told them stories all day long. There was something familiar in his smile, something Minn couldn't quite explain. Minn wasn't quite sure it was a good idea to stay all winter, but Mitt told her about Trula and how Trula told him not to push the river. It will flow by itself. Minn thought about that and agreed. "But I'm afraid of the ghost," said Minn to Mitt. "I'm not sure I like living in a house with a ghost." As each day came closer to the full winter, each night the ghost did something more and more unusual, and each night Mitt and Minn tried very hard to stay out of its way. One cold, snowy night before bedtime, Richard made a fire in the fireplace, and he set Mitt and Minn on top of the mantel so they would get good and warm from the hearth bed of the fire. And that's when it happened. Mitt and Minn sat quietly in between dozens of photographs, each one in a different frame, some small and ornate with delicate decoration around the border, some large and wooden and old. It was there that Minn spotted a familiar face in a photograph. She went closer to see the woman. She was young and looked lovely. Richard stood up from stoking the fire and said to Minn, "That's my mother. I haven't seen her in a very long time, and it makes me sad." And that's when Minn knew. The woman in the picture was Gertie from long ago. Gertie was Richard's mother. Minn did not know how to tell Richard that she knew his mother and that his mother had been a mother to her too, although she was good at sending messages in the subtle ways that mice can do. This was much too much of a story to tell him in a simple way. That night, when Minn went to bed, she fell asleep thinking about how sad Gertie was when the locket given to her by her son was broken, and how much Gertie wanted to see her son once more. Although Minn never knew what happened between them, she did know that both of them were sad inside and wanted to be together somehow. Right before drifting off to sleep, Minn told Mitt that, in the morning, she would figure out a way to let Richard know about Gertie. But that chance never arrived for Minn. Okay, so this is where we're going to stop today. And the next part, section 8, is going to be the last part of the book. So we will find out, do Mitt and Minn find their parents? Does Gertie and her son Richard ever reunite? Some of those questions may be answered. Some of those questions might not. You'll have to stay tuned for tomorrow. Bye-bye.